there, and welcome to the Secrets of Organ Playing podcast. I'm your host, Vidas Pinkevičius. Welcome to Secrets of Organ Playing podcast number 82. This is Sunday, February 19, 2017, and today's guest is Peter Holder, who is the sub-organist of St. Paul's Cathedral in London, where he accompanies the cathedral choir in the daily services and at concerts and events of national significance. Peter is also an organ tutor at the Junior Royal Academy of Music and previously undertook undergraduate and postgraduate studies at the Royal Academy of Music, gaining numerous scholarships and awards, most notably Her Royal Highness Princess Alice, the Duchess of Gloucester Prize for exemplary studentship at graduation in 2013. Peter has previously held posts at Westminster Abbey, St. Albans Cathedral and South Westminster. He has broadcast for BBC radio and television on many occasions and maintains a full and varied schedule as a solo recitalist, orchestral organist and continuo player in addition to fulfilling his duties at St. Paul's. In this conversation, Peter talks about what does it take to play such magnificent instruments at one of the most important cathedrals in the world and what is the musical life behind it. To illustrate this conversation, you will also hear the excerpts of Peter's organ recordings. Let's go to the show. Thank you so much, Peter, for joining in this conversation. I feel like we are having a virtual cup of cappuccino already, right? And we'll be having a wonderful talk about the things that we both enjoy and love, your musical career, musical life at St. Paul's Cathedral in London. You know all about those organs and all about those vast spaces, right? So before I go any further, let me thank you so much for your generosity, time and wisdom, and welcome to the show.
It's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Excellent. So this question that I usually ask Peter, our guests, at the beginning is very, very interesting because people in their childhood days sometimes get introduced to the king of instruments somehow, right? Either from recordings or maybe from visiting real instruments. Do you remember the story? Can you share how you first fell in love with the organ?
Of course, yeah. I mean, details are slightly patchy. I can't remember exactly what my first true inspiration was, but I can tell you a little bit about how I started learning the organ. By some chance that I can't exactly remember as well, my brother began singing in a local church choir. And as families do, we started to support him, and my father joined the choir. And it was only a matter of time before I also joined that choir. I suppose I had rather more of a fascination with the organ at the church than I did singing with the choir. So it wasn't long before I started asking if I could have a go on the organ. I had already been playing the piano for a number of years. I began playing the piano and violin, both at the age of 4. So I was able to start playing a few hymns on the organ, and then the choir master would say, well, play this pedal note at the same time, and slowly you start to build an impression of something that sounds quite realistic.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a real passion at that point, but it was a couple of years later that again, by chance, somebody suggested that I considered auditioning to be a chorister at Worcester Cathedral. That was my local cathedral. And I did that, and the choir master there started to get an idea of my enthusiasm for the organ and said, well, why don't you come and have a look at the organ? And he let me play, I think, 3 notes. I seem to remember rather well. And it was those 3 notes that really captivated me and inspired me further. So it really was only a matter of time before I started learning.
And forgive me for asking you, Peter, this. How many notes can you play today?
It's very good question. Well, I suppose the number of pipes on the St. Paul's organ is, I think, 7,500.
Exactly.
So all of those at the same time? I don't know.
So from 3 notes to 7,500. 7,500, right? It's amazing journey, right?
It's not bad.
It's like for you know, this first astronaut Yuri Gagarin, right? Russian astronaut who flew around the globe, right? The first time, and apparently he lived with his parents in a mud hut, basically in a village somewhere in Russia, and they didn't even have electricity or heating. But in his lifetime, he flew around the planet, right? So it was a dream. So like yourself, from 3 notes, now you can wield this magnificent 7,500 pipe instrument, right?
Extraordinary. Extraordinary.
Extraordinary. Everything is possible, Peter.
Absolutely that. So fortunate.
Yes. So, Peter, it's interesting. Do you remember what was the first piece that you played publicly on the organ?
That's a very good point. I do struggle to remember that. I think, like many organists, you begin with the tutor book.
Yeah.
So there are a number of pieces that I was performing manuals only, and I suppose in England certainly there is such demand for organists at parish level that it was no time at all before I was being asked to deputise for services. So I seem to remember that I always enjoyed playing hymns, and I still to this day love playing hymns. I mean, there's nothing more inspiring in a place such as St. Paul's, leading nearly 3,000 people singing lustily a great hymn. So that's one level of enthusiasm that has stuck with me throughout. But I mean, that is what I recall the most about my early performing days as an organist. I think my first recital performance was absurdly young, I suppose, around about 10 or 11 in my local church, again in a little town called Bewdley. And I vaguely remember playing a number of French toccatas, I think the Dubois toccata. After that, I can't really remember.
Peter, what was your feeling at the first performance of these French toccatas? Were you terrified, excited, or just very relaxed? What was it for you?
I dare say I'm more terrified today than I was back then. We know no fear as children, do we?
Exactly. The first performance is always fun.
Absolutely.
But the second one is a
Tell me
disaster,
about it.
right? Because you realize, wow, they are looking at me. I can make a mess of my pedal playing, right? I can hit wrong notes, and they came just for me to listen. Sometimes they buy tickets, right? And we feel unworthy of their time and money.
Absolutely. And if it goes well, I suppose you can become a victim of your own success and create an expectation, which adds to the pressure, of course.
And of course, the opposite is also true. If it goes well, you can feel like a star, right? A rising star. And it's not also very healthy, right? Too much grandeur or too much basically, beating.
We want to stay grounded. Yes, stay grounded. Keep humble.
Keep humble. Yeah. Excellent. So I'm glad, Peter, that you continue to practice after the first public performance, right?
A little bit.
You were not discouraged by some of the difficult spots. What happened next, right? Who were your mentors later on?
Yeah, I mean, so to continue the story, I was a chorister at Worcester Cathedral, as I mentioned before. That I began there at the age of 6. Started organ lessons at the Cathedral School, where I was schooled as part of my choristership. So that began at the age of 8, and I continued until my voice changed, and that was, I think, the age of, halfway through sort of 13 to 14. That sort of time. And I was very, very fortunate in coming by a local church organ scholarship at that point. And they ran a very, very fine tradition, Anglican choir and essentially I was able to begin accompanying all the music that for the last 7 years I had been singing. So it really was straight from one part of the choir stalls, if you like, round to the organ loft, and it was quite a steep learning curve. But in a sense, for someone with my kind of personality, that was the best possible thing that could have happened to me, because it was terrifying at first, really terrifying. And I remember my first day in this job, if you like, turning up, expecting to observe. Just see what things were like, and the choir director said to me, you do realise you're playing for this service, you've got to do this, you've got to accompany that and this. I hadn't done these things at all before. It's one way to learn, and I realised later on, of course, I thrive on that kind of pressure, which I suppose you could say is why an environment such as St. Paul's now suits me so well. So I continued in that position, that training position, if you like, for the next 4 years, which saw my schooling out. I finished at school, obviously, around the age of 17, 18, and took on a Cathedral organ scholarship at Westminster, beautiful, beautiful cathedral in rural Nottinghamshire. And that was a fantastic place for me to broaden my horizons, spread my wings a little bit, and start to enjoy a little bit more what I was doing and the fruits of my labours over the last few years, and that was the point at which I started to decide that maybe I was going to make something of this.
Amazing. You still continue to practice there, right? Continue to perform. What were your duties there at your next step, at the next position? Were you also required to accompany the choir, play hymns, right? Something else?
Exactly that. So an organ scholarship, I suppose, is quite a specific thing to the UK, or at least I think its origins are in the UK. I would say the Anglican tradition works on the basis of apprenticeships, learning on the job, and I suppose the organ scholarship is the epitome of that. So in essence, you are doing everything that your senior colleagues, the assistant organist or organist, whatever you want to call them, master of the choristers, you're doing the same things as them, but a watered down version of them. And the idea being that they are mentoring you at the same time and offering you some guidance. So I suppose even from that very first job, I was doing the same sort of things. I was training the choristers. I was playing for some of the even quite big services. Getting my hands dirty, I suppose, in the office, making coffee. Of course, there are a certain number of slave duties that come with these positions as well, but it's all part of growing into an institution and understanding what this work is and what this tradition is about. And I, having seen it really from the very bottom of the pile now to slightly higher up the ladder, if you like, I can really see that it works. It's I suppose quite an old form of learning to copy others. It certainly works for me, and I've seen it work for others. I think it's a very capable means of education.
English tradition is so profound, and because of this, in England there is so vast amount of perfect, let's say near to perfect organists, choirs, right? Entire musical tradition, right? Somebody said that England is basically a land without music, which is totally wrong, right? I think Germans said that, right?
Yes.
A long time ago, which is totally actually wrong. And today, actually, English tradition is known all over the world, and Americans actually try to copy, in some cases, English cathedral scholarship tradition too. So I'm glad you were a part of this, trying to learn the craft from the masters, right? And they were good masters, right? They were not envious of you, right? They tried to help.
Absolutely. I mean, I suppose I'm particularly fortunate that I've landed very many wonderful mentors, and I would struggle really to pick out one above the other, because each one at every step of my development has been very, very helpful and been the right person at the right time. I hope that's true for everybody, but I can certainly speak for myself in that regard.
Are your mentors still alive?
I would say yes, entirely. Every single one.
So we want to mention some of them because they might hear this conversation, right? Excellent.
Oh, I very much struggle to pick one. I would hate to pick one and miss others out, but I would say, I mean, to single out a few, I suppose. My first organ teacher, who was also the director of music at my school, taught me for I suppose near to 10 years, and gave me so much time, and really took care and nurtured me. And I suppose it's that difference between adhering to, I suppose, a formula in terms of teaching and actually just doing the right thing for your pupil. And he very much towards the latter approach, knowing that at times I was persuading him to teach me music that really wasn't very sensible for me at that stage. I mean, I really can name an example in the Dupré Prelude and Fugue in B major, which I remember learning absurdly young. In hindsight, I've really struggled with that piece ever since because I just learned it too young and I picked up bad habits. But my teacher recognised that I needed that enthusiasm, I needed that project to give me drive at that particular point in time in my development. So I have absolutely no regrets in that regard, even when I pick that particular piece off the shelf now and think, goodness, I wish I hadn't learned that until more recently. After him, well, I suppose in tandem with him, I had a wonderful piano teacher who in a similar way really guided me and gave me a huge amount of time. I then moved on to another piano teacher, and who was a little tougher on me, but hugely inspired me musically, and again was very, very generous with time. I used to travel to London for those lessons, and that was. I remember it was a time when school life was taking over, I suppose, and one is under increasing demands academically. And I found it hard to fit in the time to practice the piano as much as I wanted to. At that point in time, I suppose the organ was my passion. But I always enjoyed the piano a huge amount, but with only a certain number of hours in a day, one had to take priority over the other. So I remember travelling to London with a guilt complex, thinking, oh, here's another lesson that I've not really done very much preparation for. And my hugely inspiring and kind piano teacher would turn this 3-hour lesson into something very, very, well, unbelievably worthwhile, nevertheless.
I'm sure it was. And Peter, do you think that your experience with piano early on helped you become a better organist today?
Absolutely. I mean, I find more so than the organ, and I make no bones about this, but I do think the piano is a more instinctively musical instrument. I think it's possible to replicate that on a fine organ, but I do think the piano has an immediate beauty that it's hard not to come by, if you like. As it happens, in the last week, I've spent a considerable amount of time purchasing some new pianos for the Cathedral, and I have to say I've rather been in my element doing that, travelling around the various piano shops of London. They can be unbelievably beautiful instruments.
Have you seen the opposite example, Peter, of where you meet a brilliant pianist but a rather poor organist?
I suppose we have to be honest about the techniques are different.
Yeah.
You know, and I think there are a number of people in this country and other countries, of course, but I obviously I focus on those local to me who have held very eminent careers as both pianist and organist, or organist and pianist, whichever way you want to put it. But I don't think any of us would pretend that the techniques are the same. I suppose it's a question I'm asked a huge amount in the Cathedral by the numerous tourists who come to ask us about the organ, and they say, oh, is it the same as playing the piano? Well, you know, that it's essential to be able to play the piano. And I would go further in saying, actually, to be able to make music on the piano is essential for you then to replicate that on the organ. But yes, of course, I mean, the obvious difference is is the introduction of your feet. It's a very different manual technique, of course, as well. But more to the point, I see that actually with the organ, I think you're driving a machine. I think it's a mechanical concept. And if you can drive that machine and make music,
right.
then I see that's what makes you a really fine organist. I think as a pianist, you haven't quite got that distance between yourself and the music. But I think with organs, and this is not a criticism by any means, because many organs are very comfortable to play, but they are essentially machines.
So basically what you're saying is that on the piano you play yourself, and on the organ the instruments is playing, and you're only wielding it, right? You're letting it play, basically. Can I say it like this?
I think you can. Enough? Yeah. That is how I see it. I mean, it's very, very careful manipulation, and of course, some instruments do more for you than others, don't they? And of course, it depends on the repertoire. And this is why going to play historic instruments can be so unbelievably inspiring, because they in so many ways make the music for you, don't they? But they also have, their limitations. You play historic instruments, you can't play so fast. To be very simplistic about it, in giving one example.
So, was your experience with piano technique was a prerequisite for your current position at St. Paul's? Basically, did it help to get to the point where you are today?
I suppose I see it in smaller terms, that in repertoire terms, if you like. I know, and I have to remind myself this, in terms of self-discipline, I know that if I keep my piano technique strong, I can learn music so much faster. And actually, I remember, again, to name an example, the Russill toccata, when I had to learn that a number of years back. I didn't actually learn it with my organ teacher. I learned it with my piano teacher. And that has stood me in an unbelievably good stead, partly because of the different perspective a pianist gives on a piece like that, which essentially is, it is piano writing as such, but also just the technical grounding. If you've got the strength to achieve what you need to achieve with vitality on the piano, then there's a very, very good chance you'll be able to achieve the same on the organ. I carry around in my bag every single day a book that says an hour of piano practice a day, and I'd be lying if I said I think I'd ever achieved that, but it's at least is a daily reminder of something that would help me enormously, and I see the benefits hugely. The other similar benefit is playing a small mechanical practice organ. The days I'm able to go and do that, as opposed to playing the vast cathedral organ at St. Paul's, for example, it really transforms my technique. I really reap the rewards of that, and I'm always striving to do it more, if only there were more hours in the day.
At St. Paul's, Peter, what kind of organ do you play? Because there are many, right? How many organs there are in total at this?
Okay, so there are. I think 5 is the figure. If I start with the very smallest, we have a little chamber organ by Kenneth Tickell. We use that for accompanying early music. Tallis, Bird, Gibbons, Weelkes, those kind of composers, or even Bach motets very, very occasionally. And that allows us to be part of the choir, part of the ensemble. And this little organ is mobile, and we place it between the two sides of the choir. It just gives a slightly more compact performance, if you like.
Yes.
Then we have a small practice organ in our choir practice room. we have a very beautiful and quite recent instrument by William Drake. That's a 2-manual mechanical instrument built along Baroque lines. It's in a mild temperament as well. That's in our Order of the British Empire Chapel, which is underneath the choir of St. Paul's. That space is used for weddings and baptisms and memorial services for those affiliated with the Order of the British Empire. And we have several of those services each week, so that organ gets quite a workout. It has to accompany the choir a little bit, but primarily it's there for leading big hymns, voluntaries, if you like, and it does that very, very effectively. People are really captivated by the sound that it makes. It was voiced by a Dutch voicer, and it really does have that Baroque characteristic that really does captivate listeners. People often remark on that. Upstairs, we have what we call the Willis on wheels. This is Henry Willis instrument that is, I forget the dates of it, but it's old. A small, compact 2-manual instrument, but it's quite a weight. So it's mobile, but not very mobile. When I say that, it requires about 10 people to move it. We keep this under the dome of St. Paul's, and on one hand, it can act as quite a useful fallback should we, God forbid, have any major problems with our main instrument. But it's also used when we perform double organ masses, such as those by Longley, Vienne, Vidor. So we can perform those sort of authentically, with one organist using that as the choir organ and then somebody else on the grand organ playing the grand organ parts. And then last but by no means least, we have the very, very fine 5-manual instrument, originally by Willis, and more recently expanded by Noel Mander and now John Mander's firm. And that instrument, to give you a little bit of the history of it, the casework was the design of Christopher Wren, so dates from the very, very beginning of the Cathedral. And the instrument today still houses maybe 100 of those pipes from the original instrument, the open diapason number 2 on the grate, to give one example. And that's that, like a fine wine, has just matured and matured. It's a very, very, very beautiful sound, both up close but also in the space. That instrument was essentially completely reimagined by Henry Willis at the end of the 19th century. And with the advent of pneumatic technology, Willis was able to split this case, which previously faced east-west on a screen, facing east-west down the cathedral. He was able to split it in two, put it on the north and south sides of choir, with pneumatic piping running underneath the choir. This was a pretty bold move at the time, and testament to his work that the organ looks just as well in situ now as it did in the original cathedral. And it wasn't long before the instrument started to be expanded. So with the removal of the screen at the head of choir, the acoustical conundrum of the dome of St. Paul's had to be tackled. So it's well known that this dome creates an acoustical reverb of about 13 seconds. And you can imagine how challenging that can be in terms of making music.
13 seconds, right? It's unbelievable. Unbelievable. It's one of the biggest cathedrals on earth, right?
It's extraordinary, and to experience it daily is unbelievable.
Can you describe a little bit the feeling when you play this grand organ, and how different you have to adapt to it in comparison to, let's say, the choir organ, right?
Absolutely. I mean, the sound just continues and continues and continues. I suppose you have to be strategic in thinking all the time, where is your congregational, where is your audience, where is your choir, which divisions of the organ do I use? So what I was sort of alluding to before is that to tackle this acoustical conundrum, the organ builders decided to start experimenting with expanding the instrument around the building. And ultimately, I think that experiment has been considered a success. So Willis started by putting some pipes up in the dome. And because it was an experiment at first, he used pipes that were recycled pipes. And I think it was Jean Longley who commented when he when he came to play some years ago, of course, that he doesn't play to the pigeons. He refused to use those dome pipes. But in the 1970s at least, that division in the dome was comprehensively restored. New high-pressure trumpets were added up there for ceremonial occasions. And also in the 1970s, they decided to add a further chorus division at the west end of the cathedral, and also some chamade reeds, if you like, some what we call the royal trumpets or the state trumpets, and they were inaugurated at Her Majesty's Silver Jubilee celebrations. So there was an attempt, I suppose, to create what I describe as a rather expensive surround sound system.
Right.
And I think that is largely successful. But that's not to say that we don't have to use other strategies as well. So to go back to what you were asking, when we're performing, I suppose maybe we take more space, we breathe more in our musical performances. There was a time when the performance tradition at St. Paul's was to perform everything a lot slower. Right. I would say we've moved away from that now. In terms of organ performance, as I say, I breathe more. I also articulate more, but that's partly my personal manner of playing as well. So I suppose the two are suited in that regard.
And especially if you play polyphonic music, right? Polyphonically complex pieces, you probably want to slow down a little bit, right? Too.
I mean, yes, absolutely. And also, I think there has to be an honesty here that certain music is not effective in that space. That is my feeling. So there are certain works of Bach that are so contrapuntally sort of intertwined that I think too much is lost. And I will prefer not to play music like that. I mean, a piece, for example, that does work quite well is I played the other week is the Bach Prelude and Fugue in D. The fugue is of course more transparent, and if you play it on a registration that is very clean, so say the fugue on 8, 4 and 2 without complicated mixtures or 16 foots, then I think it can sound absolutely glorious in that space. But those are the kind of strategies you're playing with, very, very strategic use of registration.
So organists who come to you, right? Guest organists sometimes think, oh, they have 16-foot trumpet, right? I have to use it on the manuals all the time. And this is not the case, right? If you're playing complex polyphonic works, right? You want to have this clarity sometimes.
Absolutely, and you have
if the tempo is lively.
And you have to allow the building to be the judge, and again, that is hard. I mean, particularly there are two means of playing the organ at St. Paul's. There's a fixed console in choir, and that is where we accompany the choir from the majority of the time, and from there you can hear the chancel organ very, very effectively. So you can accompany the choir and judge very, very well the balance. It's harder to judge the building from that space, but by and large, when you're accompanying the choir there, your congregation are also within that more intimate space, and you can judge things well. We can also play from under the dome. Now, the challenge there is that you are slightly separated from the chancel pipework, and you are underneath the point at which the dome pipework speaks. So that goes all over your head. And as I say, you're blocked from the chancel pipework. So you're essentially hearing everything through reverberation. That can be quite a challenge because you can be playing the next note before you hear the last one, if that makes sense.
Do you remember, Peter, the first day when you touched this grand organ in your life? What was the feeling?
Actually, I mean, the first time I played at St. Paul's, I was still working in my previous position at Westminster Abbey. And I was deputising for a number of services after Easter. I suppose at that time I was very, very well tuned to the instrument at the Abbey, which was quite a different one, I suppose. And I suppose I was slightly guilty of trying to make the St. Paul's instrument sound like the Abbey organ, as you do when you're well tuned into one instrument over another. But I was completely bowled over by the space, I suppose, initially, and more recently, I've so grown to love the sound of that organ. It's utterly captivating.
It's like ocean of sounds, right? Basically, roaring.
Exactly that.
Yeah.
It can be so thrilling.
Yeah, once in a lifetime opportunity for people to hear this wave, tsunami of sound, if you will, right? It coming at you if you are in the pews, right? Listening. It's probably unforgettable experience. Probably.
Well, I've never worked anywhere before where an organ captivates the average person, the non-musician, the average tourist, and they are the majority of people that come to St. Paul's. I've never worked in a place that captivates them in such a way as the organ of St. Paul's. People will come to recitals not expecting to be at a recital, and just sit there completely in awe of this experience, this sound. There's something otherworldly about it. It's magical.
I was going to say, probably this entire experience, building, right, music, instrument, acoustics, right, 13 seconds, they all work together and help the listener probably move to another dimension, so to say, maybe to another place in time and space, where they can feel like in a bliss, right? A moment of bliss. And you, an organist, right? You're playing, you are wielding these instruments and creating this magical opportunity for them. Isn't that a great privilege?
It's a privilege, exactly is what it is. A complete honor, and that is our job. And how fortunate are we to be able to do that? And I see St. Paul's is right in the heart of the city of London. It's opposite the Stock Exchange. It's right next to the sort of the financial district, I suppose, of London. It's a really busy and noisy place, and if people can just drop by the cathedral and see it as a sanctuary, a safe haven, a place of quiet and of prayer, then we're doing our job right, if you like. And I do see that as consider it a daily reminder what an honour it is to be part of that movement.
When you go back in time, Peter, you still remember your early days as an organist? Can you say what was the number one thing you wish you knew back then that might have helped you to develop further, faster, more efficiently, and in general made your life easier? Is there one thing?
One thing I think I increasingly feel, because I'm doing more teaching now, of course, and I see younger students and I see them thriving, and I think, gosh, it's incredible what they're achieving at such a young age. If I'm completely honest, I look back and I wouldn't change a thing, because I'm doing now what I always dreamed of doing. And of course that means you have some knocks and bumps along the way, and if I wanted to take things apart, I could say, oh, I wish that hadn't happened, but all of that has shaped me. Mm-hmm. You know, we often say, of course, you know, the best music we make is when we're not necessarily that happy. Mm-hmm. So I see an advantage in everything that's happened to me. It's all steered me in the right direction. Mm-hmm. I couldn't be happier with the variety of work that I do now. I mean, I do quite a lot outside of St. Paul's as well now, both teaching, playing concerts, choir training in Europe and in the United States as well. I suppose I could say I'm living a dream.
And Peter, what are you working on right now? After, for example, our virtual cappuccino today, what are you going to practice today or prepare for? What is your schedule look like?
I suppose, I mean, I can give you an idea of an average day. This isn't an average day because it's my day off from St. Paul's, so it's my day to catch up on freelance work and I suppose my personal life, if you like. But a typical day at St. Paul's would begin with rehearsing the choristers. I always try. And I give emphasis on try. It's not always possible, but I do aim to do some organ practice in the morning, either preparing for the liturgies later that week, or whatever repertoire project I might have on the go. So I try to do that early on in the day before you're too weighed down by the various meetings. So we attend a lot of planning meetings, and I'm responsible for fixing organ recitalists at St. Paul's and also meeting all the wedding couples and helping them to choose their music. And the day, of course, typically ends with evensong. That is our daily sung liturgy at 5:00. And often there are concerts and the like after that. In terms of projects at the moment, I suppose I've just been performing Messiaen's La Nativité, which is a completely wonderful and amazing experience. It's the second time I've performed it at St. Paul's, and performing it in a sort of quasi-liturgical environment is something that will, an experience that will stick with me for the rest of my life. I do hope that I'll be able to do it at least one or two more times. Recently, I suppose in the last week, I've been working on the Bach Dorian Toccata and Fugue for performance next week. And that's a interesting and complicated work, which I'm glad to have come at in later years, I suppose, to allude to what I was saying earlier about learning certain pieces slightly too soon. So I'm really enjoying getting to know that, and I dare say I'll be doing further work on it, particularly the fugue, I think, tomorrow.
Excellent. And any practices of further Messiaen cycles like Le Scorpio Glorieux, for example, for Easter? Are you also in planning this in the future?
Actually, I'm performing in a meditation, a sort of quasi-liturgical offering, the Tournamere, 7 Last Words of Christ. Wow. And I did that once before at St. Paul's for a Holy Week meditation. So I'll be performing that at St. Paul's on, I think it is Passion Sunday at 6 p.m. And I think that's an inspiring work, particularly, as I say, when performed interspersed with the readings of Scripture. It makes sense, I think.
Yes, that's how it was originally conceived, actually. And Tournamere was a great organ meditator, basically, with his great cycles, right? Helping organists to make this entire experience so mystical, so to say, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. I suppose another project I'm working on, which it doesn't sound quite so exciting, maybe it's a practical project in a sense, but it's the release of a recording that I made 2 years ago. And I'm embarrassed to say that I made it so long ago and that it's not yet commercially released, but it's too easy to be taken over by the practicalities of life rather than furthering the projects that you might like to. But I recorded it near Abbey in southern Germany. One of the most, if not the most inspiring instrument I have probably ever played, Holzhai, restored by Kuhn, instrument above the west windows. Again, a glorious acoustic and a glorious instrument and building to match. And I recorded the works of what I call the Bach family, so JS, but also a number of his sons, and actually edging into sort of romanticism with composers such as Rink, and also a work of Mozart before that as well. So I'm working sort of daily on writing the sleeve notes for that and having it prepared for commercial release. And I'm very excited to have that done, such that I can move on to the next project.
I hope Peter that is in this year or even sooner, right? Your CD project will be completed and people around the world will have a chance to experience your playing on recording.
St. Paul's, one of the amazing things there, of course, is being able to speak to the average person who has not necessarily any interest in the organ, but they're captivated by the instrument, and you're able to say, well, this is what this pipe does, and this is how the instrument works, and then let them play. And you send these people out to the cathedral with an experience they never thought they would ever have, and completely inspired by a new concept. And I see that, as it's an enormous pleasure. I really, really enjoy that side of my work, if you like, introducing the instrument to new audiences. I think I was listening to one of your other interviews in which someone was saying how they enjoyed doing organ transcriptions, which I also enjoyed doing a huge amount. But what I see there is being critical, is choosing repertoire that's engaging to the listener.
Yes.
And I think there's something very, very important about choosing the right music, somehow being engaging and entertaining, but without dumbing down, if you like. So providing the serious works of J.S. Bach, but also perhaps including an orchestral transcription that shows off the various colours of the instrument as well. I think so much is critical in terms of repertoire planning and indeed registration.
You're right. This variety issue is so critical, right? When you choose the repertoire, right? If you love one side of the instrument, one side of the repertoire, you can forget the listener who is new, right? And the more I play on the organ too, I sort of sometimes like to actually have variety in the organ repertoire too, because this variety of experiences gives like a good meal, right? You have a little bit of that, and a complete menu.
Exactly, and I was very glad that you didn't ask me if I had a favourite composer, because that's what most people do, and of course I don't. I mean, I enjoy playing everything, and as you say, like a good meal, people want to hear a bit of everything, and unfortunately that's what keeps me interested as well.
On special occasions, though, of course, if you have this, for example, tournamir, right, a cycle, right, a liturgical cycle, you only need the cycle. You won't play Mozart or Bach in that, right? It makes sense to have this unified program, right?
Yeah.
But you have to communicate then about the theme, right, in the right way, so that people would know what to expect and be on the same page.
Yeah.
So Peter, how does the main Sunday service look like at St. Paul's? Is it a special service where the bishops and every Majesty, Her Majesty sometimes participates, right?
I suppose so. That there's a daily round of services. So each day of the week we perform evensong at 5:00, and that's a sung service by our cathedral choir. I think I mentioned previously, on Saturdays we also include a number of weddings and baptisms, possibly a memorial service as well. And there are any number of special services that might take place in the week as well. But the way a Sunday looks, it begins with a said service of Holy Communion at 8:00, followed by sung matins, which I suppose is the morning equivalent of evensong, again sung by a cathedral choir. And then I suppose the prime service is the Eucharist, or the Mass, if you like, at 11:30. And that's attended by the full cathedral chapter. That is, I suppose, our main service. Takes place underneath the dome of St. Paul's. It's one of the very few occasions when we sort of come out, as musicians, come out to the people and perform under that vast and incredible dome. Most of the time we perform in the more intimate space of choir. Later in the day we again have evensong at the earlier time of 3:15. We follow that with a weekly organ recital, and follow that again by a final Eucharist or Mass at 6:00, which includes organ improvisations. But I suppose all of that forgets what some people would see as our primary function. I think we see the daily round of services as our primary function, but other people might regard St. Paul's as the cathedral of the nation. And we have very specific responsibilities there. So there are a number of very important national events that we have to host. And of course, you never quite know what warning you might be given, depending on the nature of that event. But more recently, I suppose last June, we hosted Her Majesty the Queen's 90th birthday celebrations. That was a stunning festival, if you like. And that's, I suppose, when we're all aimed to be on our finest form, and those occasions can be completely thrilling and terrifying as well, but completely thrilling and an honour to perform at them. Other more sensitive occasions might be, I think the previous year we marked the 10th anniversary of the London bombings. So we are a house for that kind of prayer and worship as well, and invariably those kind of performances are documented on live television as well. So there's an important function there, and duty to the nation, to the state.
Being a national cathedral, St. Paul's, you probably have the opportunity to really commission new works, right, for those occasions?
Absolutely. And we did, in fact, for the service I mentioned, for the Queen's birthday last year, we commissioned a work by Judith Weir. And so, of course, it's very, very important within our tradition that we keep the repertoire fresh. In fact, just last year, we ran a collaboration with a UK magazine, Choir and Organ magazine, a collaboration, and we essentially wrote about the various facets of the music department at St. Paul's, and by return the magazine commissioned 6 new works for the cathedral within that year, 4 for choir and 2 for organ. And that was a fantastic sort of crash course, I suppose, if you like, in commissioning music. But I think aside from that, we would aim once or twice a year to commission a new work, not necessarily even for a special occasion, just to keep the repertoire fresh. Again, just last night, actually, at Evensong, we performed a work that was new to us as a cathedral. I mean, the work itself is about 40-odd years old, but new to us. It's very, very important.
So, Peter, I guess in this kind of space, in this cathedral, probably any organist would feel compelled to create, right? Not only to perform, but to have a creation spirit, right? To create something of composition or improvisation or put down on paper. Do you compose also sometimes?
I suppose I haven't composed since the days when I perhaps had to, either for my school studies or for my university studies. I was a student at the Royal Academy of Music for 4 undergraduate and 1 postgraduate years, and I now do some teaching there too. So I've composed when needs must, but for my own pleasure, I suppose I've done some arrangements for actually, as it happens, to give you some idea of the broad scope of what we do. Just at Christmas just gone, we hosted a number of large charity carol services or carol concerts, and the one was for NSPCC, the National Society for Prevention of Cruelty to Children, and that carol concert concluded with an arrangement that I had to do of Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas. So I don't suppose when I started out 10 or so years ago that I envisaged doing that, but it does give you some idea of the scope of what we do. In addition to that, I've very, very much enjoyed doing my own organ transcriptions. So I've done a number of works by Elgar and Holst. In fact, I think on YouTube there's a performance of a duet arrangement I did of the much loved final movement of Saint-Saëns organ symphony number 3.
Brilliant. So, Peter, do you feel that on such a grand space, right, it's grand organ, right, an organist can improvise and create spontaneous music?
I suppose so. I mean, that's the other side to composition, isn't it? It's spontaneous composition. I've always enjoyed improvisation, but there's something quite terrifying about it. Certainly in a space like St. Paul's, you could imagine that the acoustic is liberating, and up to a point it is, as is the colourful instrument. It's liberating. But it's the same thing as, I suppose, making an error, playing a wrong note in repertoire. I'm afraid you have to suffer the consequences of that for the next 13 seconds, such is the nature of that space. So it's not necessarily a cover blanket. But, as I say, yes, it can be enormously inspiring just to improvise as part of the liturgies there. But actually what's peculiar, I suppose, or might be deemed peculiar to the Anglican tradition is, certainly at St. Paul's, there's not actually that much of a requirement for us to improvise. So personally, I have taken some studies more recently with Thierry Escaich in Paris, and I want to do that more, but I see that really for my own fulfillment rather than as a necessary to my work at St. Paul's. I would say normally I would improvise at the beginning of an evensong service, but generally that's meditative. It's only really setting up the introit that the choir are about to sing. So it's a 30-second, perhaps 1 minute meditation. So it's not really what you might say a chance to let rip. I mean, beyond that, there are occasions, even at very, very large state occasions, where perhaps a procession takes longer than anticipated, and one has to continue the sung hymn. So you continue in that vein. And that's I suppose a discipline, and perhaps one of the scariest things that we have to do. But that's quite a specific thing. It's not really like being able to liturgically improvise. You're not really able to take your own themes. You're really continuing that has preceded. So continuing the theme of that hymn. Yes. Invariably, these things turn into fanfares. So, of course, sort of quite pompous fanfares is something that we have to do quite a lot. And it's, I suppose, just as well that we have high-pressure trumpets dotted around in just about every space of the cathedral to be able to do that quite effectively in quite a thrilling manner.
I guess it's very thrilling but also relaxing experience to make your own music, even if you continue the previous style, right? Previous theme, previous hymn, and if you're no longer playing from the sheet, right? From the notes, you feel differently, right?
Absolutely. I mean, to again reference yesterday's evensong. So the opening hymn, which was a processional one, was just 4 verses long, which was not sufficient to cover the movement that was necessary. And it's quite interesting because you really switch from one discipline to another when you're playing hymns at St. Paul's. Because of the vast instrument and vast space that you're handling, and the fact that your congregation is scattered over a huge space, you're having to play in a very authoritative and quite a four-square, regimented way. So I suppose when you then break out into your improvisation, you're really having to switch from one side of your brain to the other. And I've never experienced that, in a sense, more than at St. Paul's. You are playing the hymn in a very strict and borderline robotic way. And you get to the end of that, you realize that the procession's not concluded, and suddenly you need to switch from one mindset to another and break into complete freedom. That can be quite tricky from time to time. And it can be possible on those occasions that you revert to sort of well-known patterns, if you like, in your improvisation. Apart from, partly, I suppose, because you don't know how long you're going to need to play for. Very often it can be a matter of just continuing that hymn for 10 seconds on other occasions, and I believe my colleague Simon Johnson had to do so at the Queen's 90th birthday service back in June. I think he had to improvise for about 2 minutes, which is on live television is quite a pressure, especially when you're not expecting to have to do it. Only then to return to the final verse of the hymn, having plugged the gap, and break back into that sort of more robotic means of making music. These things are a challenge, but an interesting one, an enjoyable one.
Yeah, it's part of the experience, right? It's part of the job description, probably. That you have to be open to making your own music excerpts, right? Between the verses, and do not feel like you are about to panic, right?
Exactly. I mean, I mention it as a challenge, but of course not change it for the world.
Yes, wonderful. Peter, can you tell our listeners a link where they can find you and your work online?
Of course. I mean, so there's two ports call, if you like. There's the Cathedral website for all things to do with the music of St. Paul's. That is www.stpaul's.co.uk. And my personal website, where I keep a diary and news of various concerts and activities that I'm doing, and you can also contact me there, is www.peterholdermusic.co.uk.
Fantastic, Peter. I will make sure to include those links into the description of the podcast so that people literally can click on the links and go to those places and experience the moments that you share with the world too. So thank you so much, Peter, for this generous virtual cup of cappuccino, and I hope we will meet sometime face to face. I know we will.
It would be a great pleasure, and thank you so much for your time this morning. It's been an enormous pleasure to talk. Thank you.
Excellent. If you liked this conversation, I encourage you to visit my blog, Secrets of Organ Playing, at organduo.lt, where you will find lots of insights, practical advice, and training for every area of organ playing. You can subscribe to this blog for free to get your daily dose of inspiration and to be the first to know when any of my future podcasts roll out. I hope to help you reach your dreams in organ playing. I'm Vidas Plinkevicius. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you online really soon.